So you go into a settlement conference, right? A meeting that's supposed to finally put a conflict to rest. For Victor and Marina, that was the hope. But instead, they walked out of that room with a completely different memory of what happened than the other side. And that's the mystery we're going to unpack today. This really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? What happens when you think you've said a conditional yes, but the other party hears a definite deal? It raises this huge question. When memories are in a total clash, what actually counts as a reached agreement? All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. First up, the disputed agreement itself. Then we'll dig into the two competing stories that came out of it. We'll hit the judge's big turning point and what it even means to unseal an official record. We'll also get clear on the judge's specific role here, and then we'll finish with a really important question about clarity in the legal system. Okay, let's set the scene. It's October 23rd, 2025. Everyone's back in court after that settlement conference back in July. But here's the thing, they are not there to finalize a deal. They've shown up with two completely different versions of what even went down in that room. And just look at how stark this difference is. In Victor and Marina's version of the story, there was absolutely no final deal because a super important question about taxes was left hanging. But CLBC, they maintain an agreement was reached, and it's time to make it official. I mean, these aren't just slightly different takes. We're talking about two totally incompatible realities. So, with two narratives that are polar opposites, how does a court even begin to figure out what happened? Let's take a look at how each side tried to prove their story was the right one. And this just captures the whole challenge perfectly. This isn't some small misunderstanding over a minor detail. The court is staring at two fundamentally different stories about the exact same meeting. The question becomes less about who's right and more about how do we even find a baseline for the truth when memories are this far apart. To try and prove their version, CLBC brings out the formal evidence, two affidavits. These are sworn, written statements, basically designed to get their memory of that meeting onto the official record. But not all evidence is the same. The two affidavits come from really different places. One is from someone who was physically there in the room, an eyewitness. The other is from a legal representative who wasn't there at all and is just basing their statement on looking at documents after the fact. So yeah, that's the key difference, right? The source. The first affidavit is from a first-hand account. The second is an interpretation of paperwork by someone who wasn't even in the room. And that first affidavit from the eyewitness gets very specific. The CLBC employee states flat out that they didn't hear any talk about the settlement being tax-free. And that's the very thing the claimants say was the make-or-break issue. It's basically someone saying, I was there, and that key point they're talking about, never heard it. You can imagine, for Victor and Marina, these affidavits don't clear anything up. From their perspective, the documents actually do the opposite. They just make that massive gap between their memory and CLBC's official position crystal clear. It doesn't solve the problem. It just puts the whole he said, she said mess onto formal legal paper. And this is the real turning point. The judge is looking at these conflicting memories. There's no signed agreement. So instead of trying to figure out whose memory is better, the judge makes a really pivotal move. The judge decides to go to the tape. Literally. The decision is made to get away from the messy, subjective world of memory and turn to a much more objective source, the official audio recording of that July conference. Why argue about what was said when you can actually listen to it? So the judge orders them to use the audio recording. But what does that actually mean in the real world? Let's unpack the steps involved. The order lays out a super clear 4-step process. First, that confidential audio recording gets unsealed, which basically just means it's opened up for this one specific purpose. Second, it gets transcribed into an official written document. Third, both sides get a copy. And fourth, and this is the really crucial part, that transcript is going to be used as core evidence in the next hearing. The court is literally creating a new objective source of truth. This visual shows that transformation perfectly. The whole dispute shifts from being about who remembers what to being about what's on the record. That raw audio is turned into a formal document that can be used as a factual baseline for whatever happens next. Now, during the hearing, the judge says something really specific. I am not seized of this case. It might sound like a bit of legal jargon, but it's absolutely key to understanding the judge's role at this moment. So what does not seized really mean? Well, it means this judge isn't taking full ownership of the case from beginning to end. They are not the one who's going to decide who's right or wrong about the settlement. Their job, right here, right now, is to get a solid piece of evidence, the transcript, ready for whichever judge handles the big hearing in December. Yeah, think of this judge's role as being more procedural than anything else. They're kind of like a case manager, just making sure that the next hearing has the best, clearest evidence to work with. It's all about prepping the ground for a future decision, not making that decision themselves. Okay, let's just step back from all of the legal procedure for a minute and think about what this whole thing feels like for the people caught in the middle. Because, the experience of going through the legal system is not the same for everyone. And this really highlights a subtle but massive difference. For Victor and Marina, every hearing, every document, every single step means time off work, money spent, and just a huge amount of stress. For a large institution, these exact same procedures are, well, they're just part of a normal workday, handled by staff. The impact, the burden, it's completely asymmetrical. Which brings us right back to our first question, but now with a whole new layer to it. After seeing this entire process play out, you're just left wondering, for people who are representing themselves, for people without lawyers, how can they possibly know for sure what counts as a legally binding reached agreement in the heat of the moment? How clear is the path forward when the very words you use become the heart of the dispute?